Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm going to be talking about episode 14 of season 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man called Awesome. And despite the title of this episode is pretty far from awesome. In fact, I'm not even really sure if I could call this episode okay. It's just there. It's not especially good, it's not especially bad, it's just not really much of anything. But anyway, let's get right into it and start talking about what's going on in this episode. First of all, I have to say that I think, in general, the plot to this episode was pretty weak. There was some potential there, and there were some decent character moments there at the very end, but overall, this just really felt like a very tired, very half-baked plot that could have been much, much better. But anyway, let's start talking about what we have here. And now, in this episode, I was actually really looking forward to this one because this is the one that has Spider-Man fighting the Juggernaut. And there's a really classic story in the comic books about exactly that. There are no other superheroes to be found, and the Juggernaut is on a rampage in New York, and it's up to Spider-Man to stop him. And the real crux of this episode is, I'm sorry, the story in the comics is that no matter what he does, no matter what he tries, Spider-Man is just not able to make any real impact on the Juggernaut. He is simply out of his league, and he knows it, but Spidey keeps trying. And that's what makes it such a great story. Peter's determination. It is a story that is meant to remind us of that. In fact, it's flat out meant to be a testament to Peter's determination. And so when I looked at what we got with this episode, instead of something like that, well, all right, let's start there. Let's talk about the Juggernaut. First of all, we do get his classic line, "Nothing stops the Juggernaut," and he's been saying that since at least the '90s X-Men cartoon. And I was very pleased to see that. I think that basically really does sum up the Juggernaut in one sentence. And sadly, in the comics, they can't really seem to make up their minds as to whether or not they want Juggernaut to be a good guy or a bad guy. I personally just prefer the Juggernaut as a villain, but that's neither here or there in this circumstance. Another problem that I have with this episode is the Juggernaut is given no motivation. There is no reason given at all, and that's not exactly unusual for this show, as to why he's tearing up New York. He's apparently doing it just for the hell of it. And, that's not really in keeping with the Juggernaut in the comics. In the comics, the Juggernaut is a confirmed career criminal, but he's not a stupid guy. He does things for reasons. Now, a lot of those are, someone made me mad and I'm going to pound them because I'm the Juggernaut and that's what I do. But he just doesn't go around smashing stuff just for the heck of it. He just doesn't do that. So any kind of motivation they could have provided for this, it didn't even really have to be anything particularly grand, would have just made the Juggernaut seem like an actual character rather than just a plot device, which frankly is all he really ended up being in this episode, as we saw towards the end, and even then, not an especially interesting one. After all, a humongous coincidence was needed to bring him back into the story, which sort of makes me wonder, apart from the fun of having Spider-Man fight the Juggernaut, why they bothered to put the Juggernaut in the show in the first place. But anyway, let's talk about my other major problem with what we saw in this episode. And, okay, I won't say that seeing the Juggernaut get eaten by the awesome android wasn't kind of funny. But first of all, the fact that the Juggernaut is spit out of awesome Andy's foot is not in keeping with what we had seen earlier in the episode. And believe me, I'm going to have a few words to say about that in just a little bit. But when he's spit out, he's got no clothes. And it's stated that the awesome android will feed off of any organic material. Oops, sorry, my phone. I'm sorry, inorganic material, which is of course why Coulson and the Juggernaut weren't devoured. Sorry, my phone going off kind of killed my train of thought there. Well, anyway, never mind that. Let's get back onto talking about what's going on with the characters this episode. Now, we do get a little bit of characterization with Peter this episode. He's talking about how he should have really been on the ball with the whole science fair thing. Now, that's in keeping with Peter. He basically agreed to do something, and he just didn't do it. Now, given that Spider-Man's great theme over all these years has been responsibility, seeing Peter behaving in a frankly, undeniably irresponsible manner is kind of interesting. And we do see that he does feel a pretty serious amount of guilt over his not taking this assignment seriously. And again, guilt is another one of Spider-Man's great motivators. So on that front, they actually do a decent job. And I will give the writers credit. Luke Cage finally gets what seems like some real character development. It starts off, he's upset with Peter, he's justifiably upset with Peter, but by the end of it, he has taken a lesson from Peter, he has accepted responsibility, because, as he said, Luke just basically handed the whole thing off to Peter, even though he was as equally responsible for the assignment as he was. So both Peter and Luke in this episode really kind of abdicated responsibility for the project. And seeing Luke stand up there and take responsibility for that makes me feel like Peter has rubbed off on him a little bit. And just the fact that Luke says that he and Peter are friends, that meant a lot. Now, we've seen the Amazing Friends claim they're Peter's friends before, but let's think about this. The Amazing Friends are really big on demanding that Peter share information with them, but as I've said, they don't really seem to be keen to tell him anything about their lives. They're expecting his unconditional trust. They demand this from him. I mean, literally, they have sat him down and demanded trust from him. And they've also shown a humongous disregard for Peter's concerns about his secret identity, for his desire to keep his life as Spider-Man separate from his life as Peter Parker. And in short, the Amazing Friends have been some pretty amazingly lousy friends. But here we first is one of those times where we really get to see what feels like some genuine friendship between Peter and the Amazing Friends. Now, we've seen, particularly like last week, we got to see a little bit of that with Peter and Iron Fist. Peter did seem to genuinely want to cheer Danny on, to help him overcome his doubts. And I believe I've said him earlier in my other reviews that out of all the Amazing Friends, up until this episode, I would think that Peter and Danny are the ones who have the strongest relationship. Well, anyway. So, I will give the writers credit for that. They do finally seem to be getting a little somewhere on the actual character growth of the Amazing Friends. And boy, oh boy, am I never, ever going to call the Amazing Friends Team Awesome. I don't know who came up with that, but man, Team Awesome? Really? You couldn't even got away with that on Total Drama Island. But anyway, let's talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that was going on this episode. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, in this story, in the original story from the comics, there are no other superheroes roaming around New York to help Peter deal with the Juggernaut. Well, that's the same thing here. Yet on the other hand, we know that the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier is within easy access of where all this is happening. We also know that apparently S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors the city of New York and the Amazing Friends and Peter and all this. So why are S.H.I.E.L.D. sitting on their butts when the Juggernaut is running around smashing up Manhattan? I mean, okay, if Nick Fury's out on a mission, okay, but Nick Fury is not the only agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. All right, there's literally an entire helicarrier full of guys. Couldn't they have sent like Maria Hill or Veronica Hand, or I'm sorry, Victoria Hand, or anyone there, Dum Dum Dugan, the Contessa, and Jimmy Woo, Jasper Sitwell, any number of a bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that I can name. Why didn't they send these guys to help Peter out with the Juggernaut? Or maybe call the Avengers? Well, of course they can't do that because this is Spider-Man's show, and while superheroes can guest star, they can't have them showing up every episode to solve Peter's problems for him. But let's see here. Yeah, okay, before we move on to some other things that I want to talk about, let's take a moment to talk about about Sam. We haven't really seen very much of Sam lately. He's been in the background a lot, and honestly, when he has popped up, it's really just to be a dick to Peter for no reason. And here we see this again. Now, granted, it is Peter's fault that the awesome android is rampaging around the school, but at the time, Sam, as I understand it from the plot episode, didn't seem to know that. But he's still talking about how he wants to beat Spider-Man up. So, yeah, Nova apparently blames Spider-Man for no discernible reason. And then just his antics in this episode make him look like a humongous moron. Now look, Nova is not a moron. Supposed to be a moron. He's supposed to be a hothead, but not an idiot. Now, if you look at the guy who was Nova for a really long time, Richard Rider, okay, somebody who could be a little bit of a hothead, but was ultimately underneath it all a reasonably intelligent guy? Yeah. Okay, that would be fitting. Sam, honestly, Sam's just feels like a dumb kid who lucked into the Nova powers. It's out of everybody on the show, really, Sam is the character that I think has pretty much fallen flat for me. But anyway, let's move on and talk about one more negative to this episode, and that was, God help us all, the poop joke. Now look, folks, I understand this episode is basically being aimed at, elementary school age kids, and, hey, what elementary school age kid doesn't like a good poop joke? I mean, heck, I work with elementary school kids 5 days out of the week. Believe you me, I know very well they enjoy a good poop joke. But that said, it just didn't seem necessary. And honestly, it wasn't even that funny. And honestly, while Spider-Man has a very long tradition of humor, Peter usually doesn't go for poop jokes. He's a little bit above that. So, yeah, not feeling the poop joke. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about some of the positives in this episode. One positive is we actually get a cameo appearance by, of all Marvel characters, Howard the Duck. Now, Howard the Duck is a character that I'm pretty much neutral on. I have no real major feelings about the character one way or the other. In fact, he's just one of those characters that just seems a little too strange for the Marvel Universe, which, given all the crazy stuff they have roaming around, is sort of admittedly kind of a ridiculous thing to say, but that's just kind of my feeling. Seeing superheroes interacting with the talking anthropomorphic duck guy, it's just pushing things a little bit too far for me. And I feel a little bit of a hypocrite saying that, considering that I've read a decent bit of Guardians of the Galaxy, or at least the modern Guardians of the Galaxy, and oddly found myself liking Rocket Raccoon quite a bit. Yes, there's a character named Rocket Raccoon, and if you actually sit down and give the Guardians of the Galaxy a chance, he's actually a pretty cool character. which I would actually recommend you doing because Marvel just this week announced that a Guardians of the Galaxy movie is in the works. And if I can step aside for a moment, I really can't believe we're actually going to probably get a Guardians of the Galaxy movie before we get a Wonder Woman movie. Make of that what you will, comic fans. Anyway, let's move on. Other jokes. There was one throwaway line that Peter had about cloning himself. This is, of course, a reference to the famous Spider clone / clone saga from the comics, where, the short version, there was a clone of Spider-Man running around, and, well, let's just say the whole clones of Peter Parker thing went over pretty much like a lead balloon with fans some years back and became so infamous that even Marvel made fun of just how bad those stories were. So I'll give Marvel some credit for continuing that tradition because, folks, I read a lot of those comics and believe you me, they freaking sucked. I mean, seriously, these are some of the worst Spider-Man comics to ever see print. Yeah. Okay, so yes. Before I wrap this up, I want to talk about the Awesome Android. In the comics, the Awesome Android is a creation of the Mad Thinker, who's actually, I think, one of the more interesting mad scientist characters in the Marvel Universe. He doesn't come up here, but we do get to see Awesome Andy, or at least that's the nickname that Spider-Man gives the particular Awesome Android that we're dealing with here. If you're not familiar with Awesome Andy was an awesome android who was basically, and I'm not kidding, reprogrammed to basically be a legal clerk at a law firm specializing in superhero and supervillain. Well, the law as it pertained to superheroes and supervillains. So their lawyers would go out and defend supervillains. Their lawyers would defend superheroes in court. There was actually this really one hilarious story where, and incidentally, one of the main person that worked at this legal law firm was none other than Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk. And I've read these comics. They're actually really, really good, very funny stuff. And Awesome Andy was a supporting character there, and he was actually a surprisingly well-developed supporting character. But yeah, as I was saying, there was actually a really hilarious couple of issues there where Spider-Man sued J. Jonah Jameson for defamation of character. And, I'm not going to spoil that for you, but seriously, go out, pick up some of the modern She-Hulk comics. There's a bunch of them were collected not that long ago, and give them a read. They're really, really funny. Anyway, so I did like that they were willing to tap into stuff from, again, of all places, the She-Hulk comics. And while Awesome Andy here is really not much like he was in the comics, I did appreciate that that thought was at least there. That, I think, was really just one for guys like me who are fans of the comics and know these characters pretty well. So let me see here. Let me just look at my notes real quick. Yes. One other thing about this episode that I do have to admit I really, really enjoyed. It was what little we got to see of Harry and Danny this episode. Them getting along surprisingly well, which isn't something I would have expected. But I just absolutely love seeing them go. And if you're a younger viewer, you're probably gonna miss that. But that's a very, very blatant reference to the classic 80s comedy, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's actually one of my absolute favorite movies from the 1980s, and also the movie that made Keanu Reeves famous. But I'm seriously, I absolutely never get tired of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Didn't care for much for Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, the sequel, but Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, it just, to me, never gets old. Anyway, let me see. And yeah, that covers everything that I had to say about this episode. So, overall, folks, this episode, neither good nor bad. It's just kind of there. Hopefully, we'll get something better later on down the line. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys this time. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And until next time, oh yeah, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Who's Your Jedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.